All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ellen McGee, and I'm an assessment consultant here at Riverside Insights. I work in the Midwest with schools and districts, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. And then I just wanted to say thank you to the schools and districts administrators that are joining us today. And we're very, very excited for you guys to be joining us. We know that as administrators, you face many challenges every day, from scheduling challenges to personal needs, parent conferences to community involvement and board policies. You guys deal with so much on a daily basis, and the hats you wear are endless. And it's all to ensure that your students are learning, succeeding, and growing to their knowledge, skills, and character to be competent, confident, and contributing citizens when they leave your building. So how do we help all students learn to their fullest potential? And what data best informs those decisions to ensure each and every student is successful? So today we're going to take you through the educational journey of a student as they experience limitless learning, and this will help you identify the specific strengths of each of your students and discovering their potential for learning and supporting their growth areas so they gain confidence and success prior to learning. So during today's webinar, you may have some questions that you would like answered right away. We welcome those, so please pop those into the question box on the right side of your screen, and we'll address them as the topics arise. And there are also a few handouts in today's webinar, and those are located in the handout area of the right side of your screen for download. And then today's session will also be recorded, and you will receive the recording, a copy of the slides, the handouts, and a certificate of attendance in the next day or two. So be on the lookout for those as well. And then all the recordings of Riverside Insights webinars can be found on our website at info.riversideinsights.com/K12PD. And opening that page provides you with a header shown here. But let's jump in now to our discussion.
I want to introduce you to a student named Caroline. So on a Tuesday morning, Caroline and her parents went to their local elementary school ready to enroll her in third grade. She and her family had just moved to the area from another state. And the assistant principal and the curriculum and instruction administrator at the school greeted them at the front office, and they asked Caroline's parents about her academic skills and her interests. Caroline shared that she loves to write imaginative stories, and she really likes to create detailed illustrations with those stories. So her eyes lit up when she described to them how much she really likes school, and particularly art class. And she mentioned that she's proud to have won the second grade writing contest at her previous school. When asked about math class, she mentioned it's really hard. She was required to do a lot of timed tests at her previous school, and she typically didn't do very well on those. And during the conversation, the administrators and Caroline's parents briefly discussed her school history. They learned that Caroline didn't go to preschool prior to pre-kindergarten, and it was during that pre-K school year that COVID happened. Her kindergarten year was virtual learning on a computer, and so there were some internet connection issues, which was really quite a challenge, and some lessons were missed, and really figuring out how to do school differently was quite a challenge. So first grade was spent as a catch-up learning year, and her parents said Caroline is making gains as she's entering third grade, but it's likely that she's not yet meeting the standards for third grade. And now that she's in a different state and there's different testing requirements, those are all factors in her performance and how well she's doing. So following that initial conversation, the administrators enrolled her in third grade and walked her down to her new classroom and introduced her to her new teacher and her classmates. And though quiet and shy, Caroline warmed up to her new environment and she made some friends that first day. The administrators tried contacting her previous school and the district over the next few weeks, all in an effort to get her academic records, but they were initially unsuccessful. So without formal knowledge of where Caroline is academically, her teachers and the school administrators started creating an assessment plan to determine her skills and her strengths. During Caroline's first week at her new school, her teacher administered formative assessments in each subject area, really to get a general sense of her knowledge and her skills. And observations and anecdotal notes certainly proved helpful as she got to know Caroline and add her to instructional groups with her classmates. Yet her teacher quickly discovered that Caroline was not yet mastering many of the skills that she taught in class that week. So she felt she needed to formally assess Caroline's skills, much like she did for the other students in the class that year. So an administrator pulled Caroline from class the next week and gave her just the reading and math single subject assessments of the achievement measure, the Iowa assessments. Caroline was also given COGAT so that her teacher could get a general sense of her cognitive reasoning skills. Caroline's classmates had taken both of these assessments earlier in the school year, all to help her teacher inform the classroom instruction. Caroline is within a class of students, much like your students, of mixed abilities and interests, skill levels, and achievements. So who are your Carolines? Who are your students joining your classrooms throughout the year? What backgrounds and skills do they bring with them? What skill gaps are evident as they interact and learn each day? Our current elementary school students missed many days of learning over the past few years with COVID and COVID interruptions. How well are these students mastering those foundational skills needed for new learning ahead? While we see that prior to COVID, the skill level of students in a single classroom, although varied, was not as large of a learning gap as just after COVID. Since 2021, this learning gap has expanded to 7 years, and it doesn't show any signs of narrowing. And according to NAEP, the achievement gap range increased between 5 and 10%. That gap is disproportionately affecting low-performing students. Although all students didn't make as much progress due to all the COVID interruptions, those students who were academically struggling before COVID have now fallen further behind. So the need for longitudinal data, both pre and post-pandemic, has never been greater. We know that it's critical for closing the gap and for getting our students back on track and excelling. The latest 2023 test results show that most students have not yet fully recovered from the pandemic setbacks. Students who were in districts where there were a lot of remote or hybrid learning during that 2020-21 school year, many of those students are behind the achievements of students in districts where the schools stayed open. So there are a lot of gaps to fill. So how do we get started? Well, a starting point is thinking through the data that we have, the data we need, and what can specifically and efficiently inform those classroom instructional decisions to ensure that every student is getting exactly what they need in the right time frame.
So as was just mentioned, closing that gap means that we have to have access to accurate data so that we can meet each student where they are and then grow their learning from there. Taking a holistic view of our students requires that not only do we look at achievement, but we look at ability as well. And as educators, we are so good at gathering achievement data on our students. We administer formative assessments, we give them benchmarks, we give them interim assessments and summative tests, all to support what students are learning throughout the year. But a lot of times we don't include in the conversation how our students learn, meaning how do they solve problems, how do they reason, or how do they take what they know and apply it in new situations. When we measure ability and the associated growth That is as important as knowing where each student is with their achievement. Another thing to consider is what parts of the brain are we using when we're only looking at achievement. In our classroom, we fire that back half of our students' brains all day long. We're masters at making sure that our students gain and store information. But it's also important to consider cognitive reasoning and problem-solving skills. We need to take a look at the mental processes of perception, attention, memory, decision-making, etc. When we're only using the back half of the brain, we're not firing that whole brain. So we need to make sure we're using the front half of our brain to do these things as well. Also, when we are only looking at achievement when we're assessing our students, that data can be somewhat biased. Achievement data can be based on the curriculum that a school district has selected and the processes that were used to implement that into the classrooms, the classroom environment, or it can be because of limited exposure to learning opportunities outside of the classroom. Consider a student like Caroline, who returns to the classroom after learning remotely for so long. We really have to reevaluate the metrics that we use to assess her and her classmates. We have to recognize that critical aspects of students' educational experiences might be being overlooked. That leaves us with a missing piece of the puzzle. A graphing tool like this one, which is available on cogat.com, compares achievement data scores with ability scores to help identify gaps in student potential versus where those students are performing. Students along the trend line generally have consistent reasoning skills and consistent achievement skills. But let's take a look at that student scoring high on achievement but low on ability. This might suggest that that student does well through effort and memorization, possibly due to structured learning experiences in the past. Moving forward, we would support this student's reasoning skills to align their ability with their achievement. It's really important that we identify barriers that hinder those higher ability scores. On the flip side, we can take a look at the classmate who's scoring high on ability but low on achievement. What can we ask ourselves about this student? Is the reason for their lower achievement due to a learning disability? Is there a language barrier? Or is this student just not as motivated to learn? Or maybe they just had a bad standardized testing experience. What we do know is that if we looked at achievement by itself, this student would be missed when placing them into academic programs. When we combine various data points and get a sense of where students are holistically, we can better support each student's growth and development. So thinking back to Caroline, we see her here where the little star is at the lower end of the trend line. We know she has work to do within the school year, but we also want to show that this graphic is just the tip of the data iceberg in Caroline's educational story. So what can we as educators do and what can her teachers do to help support her learning growth?
So a week or so after Caroline began at her new school, the principal, the school's testing coordinator, her teacher, the school counselor, and her parents all gathered for an initial meeting to create a plan for Caroline moving forward. After introductions, the principal asked Caroline's teacher to share some initial insights into how she's currently doing in class, and then also discuss how that gathered assessment data might help inform next steps. So, in the words of her teacher, typically, we leverage both achievement and ability data to support our students. Yet, when Caroline first came to our district, we didn't know her baseline skill level in reading or math. We also didn't know how her cognitive strengths were going to manifest themselves in a classroom setting. Because measuring student growth requires first getting a sense of the starting point, we found it important to give her the Iowa assessments and COGAT to see her skills and strengths. Caroline's classmates took these assessments earlier in the year, so we felt that having that data for Caroline would be beneficial, particularly for classroom instruction and grouping. Once we had initial data on Caroline, we looked at a few key reports that show how her achievement will grow over time in relation to her cohort, current third graders, how she compares nationally, in comparison to how well she is mastering the standards and teaching the classroom, and the specific skill areas down to the item level. So the testing coordinator who administered the Iowa assessments and COGAT to Caroline reported the following. The first test we administered to Caroline was the Iowa assessments. Given it was not the beginning of the school year, we decided to measure just her reading and math skills, including computation. Each of these single subject assessments took about an hour each to give, and since the testing platform has interactive reporting, we were able to view the skills and specific questions she missed, quickly look at her responses, and sort the questions by standard. We noticed that Caroline showed difficulty in several of the operations and algebraic thinking standards and the number and operations fraction standards, which is consistent with her classwork data. Caroline's teacher can address these areas instructionally through classroom activities. Each question on the Iowa assessment is assigned a level of cognitive difficulty. So each question requires a particular amount of cognitive thinking in order to answer the question. And these 3 levels really speak to the rigor of the Iowa assessment, asking students to perform a skill within a standard based on a complexity demand. We can see that Caroline scored average on those cognitive level 1 questions, but had greater difficulty on the level 2 and 3 questions where she had to show more of an application of the concepts. We can also do a deeper dive into her scores, including her standard score, looking at growth over time, and the national percentile rank, so how she compares with other students in her grade level across the nation. We see that Caroline showed difficulty in number sense and operations, which is consistent with her cognitive patterning, which we'll explore next. And when Caroline moves into middle school in 6th grade, the Iowa assessments will actually provide a predictability correlation to her high school and college GPAs and college entrance exams, including the ACT and SAT.
So the testing coordinators also explained that the second assessment that they administered to Caroline is the cognitive ability test, or the COGAT. And it helped us understand Caroline's cognitive strengths and her ability in the 3 areas of verbal, quantitative, and figural reasoning, or nonverbal. Looking at the COGAT data alongside of the Iowa assessments, assessment report really gives us a broader picture of who Caroline is as a learner. Caroline took the COGAT Complete and received an ability profile score, which is unique to this test. This score allows her teachers to pull her into an instructional group in the classroom based on an identified relative strength area and a relative weakness in the verbal, quantitative, and figural reasoning areas. Caroline's ability profile score is 5C, N plus, Q minus. And this is what it really means. The first number is the medium age stay-9, the 5 in this case. This tells us that Caroline's ability to reason is relatively average. The next letter to the 5 in this case is C. This is the pattern of her score for each of the 3 batteries. The C means that 2 of her scores contrasted or were very different. In this case, her quantitative and nonverbal scores. Finally, her score shows an N plus, meaning that Caroline has a relative strength in nonverbal reasoning, and a Q minus, meaning that she has a relative weakness in quantitative reasoning. These are relative, and they can only describe Caroline's profile. These scores are not in comparison to another student. Caroline's lowest battery score is quantitative, which is consistent with her achievement scores. Just before the new student meeting began, Caroline's teachers pulled Caroline's ability profile from COGAT.com and gave her parents a copy during the meeting. It gave some insights to her teachers, her parents, and to Caroline herself on how to use her cognitive strengths to really be successful in school. The administrators, Caroline's teachers, and Caroline's parents talked about how they would support Caroline in the classroom with all of the data in hand. They also provided her parents with some tools and some strategies to help her at home. They also agreed to communicate often, to review her progress in the coming weeks ahead before adjourning from the meeting.
So based on her ability profile, Caroline showed a relative strength in the nonverbal battery. This means that she and other students have a strength in nonverbal, are strong in reasoning with spatial stimuli, or strong in solving non-routine problems. And learning is easiest for Caroline when she can connect each new concept with a mental or a physical model or an object. So having a strength in nonverbal means that Caroline is great at solving new problems. So thinking back to the conversation when Caroline and her parents first walked in and talked to the administrators at her new school, she shared that she excels at drawing and sculpting and doing other visual and mechanical arts. These interests are quite typical of N+ students. So to support her instructionally, Caroline's teacher could encourage her to create drawings and to really help her solve math problems. Those drawings would really help. She can also give Caroline some graphic organizers to take notes in class. She could also encourage her to create mental models or a scene or draw a picture when reading a book. That's going to help her with comprehension as well. And teaching her through metaphors and analogies and giving some real-world examples will better help her understand concepts and connect unfamiliar abstract ideas to more familiar objects or experiences. To build on Caroline's strengths, Caroline's teacher gave her graphic organizers some real-world examples when she taught those abstract concepts. And she also allowed Caroline to build, create, and draw and manipulate objects when she was learning. Fraction bars in particular really helped her compare fractions and add and subtract them. Knowing that Caroline was not as strong in math, her teacher referenced the strategies to support these learners section in her ability profile. That section gives ways that she could leverage her nonverbal strength to support her understanding of math concepts. For example, she helped Caroline understand that math skills are learned over time with practice, and providing Caroline with many different ways to practice her skills through repetition, such as times to practice her math facts with flashcards or draw on whiteboards, or practice through online learning games in the classroom, and then some other related activities and partner activities, and also spending time in working with her in small group. That really helped solidify Caroline's mastery of skills, and it gave her confidence in her math abilities. Caroline's teacher began to praise her for the amount of effort she put into practicing math. And with her new confidence in math, Caroline started to answer more questions in class correctly, and her teacher noticed all that. Finally, her teacher used the level questioning of Bloom's taxonomy to incorporate questioning that began with what would result if something happened? How can you make a distinction between these two ideas? And how can you disprove this concept?
So the ability profile that we just discussed has a report that is generated from it, and that's called the differentiated instruction report that's shown here on the left. It groups Caroline with her classmates who share her cognitive profile. Caroline's teacher learned more about the characteristics of all of her students, as well as ideas for an instructional strategies to build on the strengths of all of her students. Her teacher also utilized the class item response record from the Iowa assessments, which is shown here on the right, to help group Caroline and her classmates by the skills that they had mastered. These reports provided an easy visual target for her teacher to look at for looking at specific skills, while leveraging unique strengths to promote academic growth. This ensures that all students can learn from a strengths-based position. Earlier in the year, Caroline's third grade teachers used a time that they had during one of their PLC meetings to place each one of their students' ability profile scores on a grid similar to this one. They used templates from cogat.com to help make sure that this was an easier task, and they wanted to ensure consistency among all of the classrooms. Having this bird's eye one-page view encouraged the teachers to be more intentional with their instructional groupings. This work also supports their MTSS initiatives. One of the standards in third grade math requires students to represent and solve problems involving multiplication and division. More specifically, students need to solve word problems in situations that involve equal groups, arrays, and measurement using drawings and symbols. One of the options that Caroline's teacher gave her was to have her create a storyboard, providing Caroline with some agency and choice while showcasing her nonverbal strength.
In March of that same school year, Caroline's data team met again, this time for a child find meeting. So in addition to reviewing their risk rating results from routine benchmarking, her teacher also voiced concern about Caroline. She asked her instructional coach for support in identifying a Tier 2 math intervention that she could deliver to Caroline and a few of her peers. While Caroline did not quite qualify for pull-out math intervention, her needs were not being met by Tier 1 instruction alone. So that instructional coach suggested using EasyCBM to help Caroline because of its ability to set goals, monitor interventions, track progress using multiple probes, and provide targeted skills practice with CBM skills. In addition to that Tier 2 intervention, during independent work time, Caroline's teacher provided her skills practice through EasyCBM's instructional tool, CBM Skills. The practice activities helped Caroline strengthen her missing skills in number and operations, fractions, and operations and algebraic thinking. Because it's gamified, Caroline really enjoyed it. She was able to practice on her own, earn badges for her achievement, and receive instant feedback on her progress. So to get that process started, Caroline's teacher first used the intervention tracker on EasyCBM to log the duration, frequency, and intervention strategy as recommended by her coach. She applied the intervention to Caroline within the platform so that the intervention phase would later superimpose over her progress monitoring graph. Every 2 weeks, Caroline's teacher administered a progress monitoring probe in the numbers and operations category. She chose the category based on Caroline's achievement test results we learned previously. Since she had a lot of options for probes, she selected the ones that focused on Caroline's specific math skill struggles, and she repeated certain probes to continue to check for understanding in areas in which Caroline took a little longer to master. On Caroline's individual student report, the halfway point shows that her teacher increased the number of intervention minutes that Caroline would receive each day. Again, using that intervention tracker allowed her to show the point at which the intervention changed and then how it subsequently affected her progress. She needed a boost so her progress could soar. Caroline was also lucky enough to have an outside tutor contracted by her parents. So this graph was shared with both her parents and her tutor to make sure that their efforts were aligned.
As we move forward with Caroline and her academic growth, let's jump to the next critical meeting with a major transition. This meeting may sound very familiar to you, but each year in Caroline School District, the 5th and 6th grade teachers meet to review math-related data and set goal for the 6th grade year. They give the Iowa Algebra Aptitude Test, also known as IAAT, to all students to guide the 6th grade teachers' focus for the next year. Because at the end of 6th grade, students take the IAAT again to inform algebra placement decisions. IAAT measures students' readiness for Algebra 1. It uniquely assesses only those skills that students will need to be successful in algebra. The teachers also administer COGAT again to all of the 6th graders, since we know and have seen how ability changes over time. And strengths-based instruction is so important in middle school. So let's take a look at their findings. This, as you can see, is Caroline's new ability profile score, 6BN+. You can see that her quantitative ability is no longer a relative weakness and that there's an area improved with her experiences and intervention. Her nonverbal ability remained strong and she increased a little in her Stay 9 score. The strategies listed on this new report, while remaining generally the same, are worth another look to ensure her teachers continue to put into action the correct strategies to support her. For example, Caroline might do well and enjoy logic puzzles and brain teasers. Discussing the theme of a story and the impact of changed elements in a story are also activities that would help Caroline's learning growth.
In the past, Caroline's district followed the traditional path to algebra. Now, though, they are more interested in taking an integrated approach. They feel it's important that students receive some kind of exposure to calculus before they finish up high school, so students have the opportunity to take a pre-algebra as early as 7th grade. There are many ways to use this test to determine student placement pathways, but ultimately the purpose is to prevent students from experiencing too much frustration or failure early in their math track by placing them in a course that they are prepared for. The Iowa Algebra Aptitude Test has 4 major themes. These emerged through research as to what students needed in order to be successful in an Algebra 1 classroom. The test provides teachers with concrete information they can use to plan instruction and set specific goals for their students for the year. Part 1 is called Pre-Algebraic Number Skills and Concepts, and this measures a student's understanding of foundational skills needed to be prepared for algebra. Part 2 focuses on interpreting mathematical information. It looks at a student's ability to read graphs, interpret given information, and apply mathematical concepts using words and symbols. Part 3 takes a look at representing relationships, or how well a student can find formulas for numerical relationships. And finally, Part 4 takes a look at using symbols, and this looks at concepts that include looking at variables, order of operations, integers, and how changes in the value of one variable in an equation affects the value of another. All 4 parts of this test taken together can assist in driving instruction and later placement. Class item analysis report was used to determine what Caroline and her peers needed to learn in their 6th grade year in order to increase their algebra readiness. Each item in the assessment is directly tied to a standard, and each is a clickable link to the question itself. The report also provides the most common distractor for each question so that the teacher can assess misconceptions. You can also see on this report that Caroline was right on the edge of being proficient and not proficient. On the left side, we see her raw score and her percent correct. The questions are also grouped by standard. This is a really great tool for determining not only what needs to be targeted to ensure that Caroline is successful in the future, but also to make sure that all of the students in the class are successful. This is Caroline's individual student performance report. We can clearly see which standards were assessed, which questions align to that standard, and how Caroline compares to her classmates. Her teacher used this data to guide her instruction throughout the year and to help her bridge that proficiency gap. She also sent this report home to Caroline's family to engage them as partners in understanding Caroline's learning.
The middle school math department at Caroline's Middle School gathered at the end of Caroline's 6th grade year to discuss what math class she should take next. So after they first pulled data at the beginning of 6th grade, they learned that Caroline was really close to being proficient in the skills needed for algebra. So they took a deeper look at her progress, and they looked at her performance throughout 6th grade, and they decided to recommend her for placement into pre-algebra that following year in 7th grade. They also discussed the possibility of her taking algebra then in 8th grade, and then looked at her potential high school math classes. So here's Caroline's individual student performance report from her Iowa Algebra Aptitude Test post-test. She took it at the end of the 6th grade year. She moved from the not proficient category into the proficient category, and that resulted in the recommendation of her placement in pre-algebra in 7th grade. With the right tools and the customized data throughout her educational years, Caroline's administrators and teachers were able to support her in growing her learning and ensuring her academic success until graduation, as well as laying the foundation for her trajectory as a lifelong learner. At Riverside Insights, we offer a comprehensive selection of measurement tools, all designed to help educators effectively assess every student. We also have resources to help translate those measurements into meaningful information that can be used across your student population. Our products provide insights into kindergarten through 12th grade students' achievement, ability, and well-being needs. We also are proud to say that we were awarded the Excellence in Equity Award for Accessibility in the Industry by the American Consortium for Equity in Education. Equity and Access recognizes companies and leaders and authors and educators whose efforts help educators achieve equity everywhere. In addition to the Iowa assessments, COGAT, EasyCBM, and the Iowa Algebra Aptitude Test that we looked at today, we also offer student well-being support for your students' mental and emotional health. One of the handouts we are sharing with you today is the Balanced Assessment Playbook. It's designed to guide you in planning an effective, streamlined assessment program in your district, your diocese, or in your building. It provides a step-by-step process for current and new administrators, teachers, and others to collaborate in looking at the current assessments that you administer and the routines around those, and ways to build a positive testing culture. So guiding questions and strategies for effectively analyzing the data, student involvement in the data gathering process, and ways that the data can be shared with stakeholders across programs, that's included as well. This free tool can be used year after year to review and refine your current assessment plan and support new administrators in understanding your district or your building's assessment landscape. So be sure to download your copy of the Balanced Assessment Playbook now, and that's in the handout section on the right side of your screen.
As you can see, we can support you and your teachers in helping every student achieve in their fullest potential. You can scan the QR code here to be linked with an assessment consultant and let us know your challenges so that we can provide you a solution or various solutions that work for you in your district. We are here to help, and we are excited to work with you so that every student is successful before they leave your schools. We want to say thank you so much for joining us today, and we appreciate you. And we look forward to talking with each and every one of you about your students' unique needs. Have a great rest of your day and a great week.